How to make people fear disrespecting you. Picture this scenario. You are sitting in a crucial meeting, or perhaps standing at a family gathering, and someone makes a subtle, sharp comment at your expense. Sarcastic. It's disguised as a joke, but the underlying intent is clear: to test your standing, to minimize your presence, or to dismiss your value. In that single fraction of a second, a neural alarm fires deep within your primal brain, your amygdala. Exhales sharply. Your heart rate accelerates. Blood rushes to your limbs. You are immediately faced with a choice that humans have faced for thousands of generations. Do you snap back in anger, or do you swallow the insult, laugh nervously, and shrink into the background? Here is the sobering psychological truth. Both of those reactions destroy your power. When you explode in anger, you signal to everyone in the room that the other person successfully manipulated your emotional state. You gave them the remote control to your nervous system. But when you stay silent out of fear or conflict avoidance, you signal something even more dangerous: that disrespecting you carries no cost whatsoever. You teach people that your boundaries are mere suggestions. Most people believe that to make others respect or even fear transgressing against you, you must display intimidation, loudness, or ruthless aggression. But behavioral science tells us the exact opposite. True social dominance and boundary enforcement do not come from volatile power displays. They stem from masterful emotional self-regulation. When someone disrespects you, what they should actually fear is not your temper. It is your unshakable composure, your surgical clarity, and the absolute predictability of your consequences. They must learn that crossing your line results in an immediate cold shift in the social dynamic that they cannot control. Over the next few minutes, we are going to unpack the exact psychological architecture behind how human beings evaluate status, respect, and social boundaries. By understanding the underlying emotional mechanics, you will learn how to condition any room you enter to treat your boundaries with absolute reverence without ever raising your voice. True authority doesn't come from aggressive outbursts, but from absolute emotional self-regulation when challenged. People disrespect boundaries only when the social and emotional cost of doing so remains zero. Uncomfortable quiet, combined with unwavering eye contact, triggers social anxiety in transgressors and restores power balance instantly. Respect cannot be demanded externally until internal standards and emotional boundaries are clearly mapped. Predictable, calm enforcement of personal boundaries conditions others to treat your limits with gravity. When someone insults, challenges, or dismisses you in a social or professional setting, a neurochemical reaction occurs almost instantly deep inside your brain. The amygdala, the ancient primitive structure responsible for processing threat and survival, fires off the alarm signal. In a fraction of a second, your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate rises, your posture stiffens, and your mind demands an immediate, self-protective response. This rapid emotional reaction is what psychologists call the amygdala hijack. It is an evolutionary mechanism designed to keep you alive in the face of physical danger, but in modern social dynamics, it is often the exact trap that destroys your personal authority. When your amygdala takes control, you are pushed into one of two default behavioral states: fight or flight. In everyday human interaction, fight manifests as defensiveness, anger, sharp retorts, and emotional explosions. Flight manifests as nervous laughter, looking away, shrinking your physical posture, or meekly letting the insult pass. Here is the critical behavioral insight that most people miss. Both of these reactions hand absolute control directly to the aggressor. If you explode in anger, you reveal that the other person successfully manipulated your internal nervous system. You demonstrate that your composure is fragile and easily shattered by external noise. The aggressor realizes they hold the power to dictate your mood and pull your emotional levers at will. On the other hand, if you submit and absorb the disrespect, you communicate that your boundaries are weak and that transgressing against you carries zero emotional or social penalty. You essentially train the people around you to view your limits as mere suggestions. True authority, the kind that makes people pause, think twice, and treat your presence with genuine gravity, is rooted in absolute emotional self-regulation during the moments of highest friction. When challenged or provoked, a high-status, emotionally intelligent individual does not allow their primitive brain to hijack their higher cognitive functions. They recognize the impulse to react, acknowledge the spike of adrenaline, and consciously choose to pause. This pause is where your true power resides. By intentionally withholding an immediate emotional reaction, you break the expected social script. The aggressor expects you to either get defensive or back down. When you do neither, but instead remain completely calm, steady, and composed, you create an unsettling vacuum of uncertainty. In social psychology, the individual who maintains complete emotional equilibrium during a confrontation is perceived as the dominant presence in the room. They demonstrate that their internal state is governed solely by themselves, not by the actions, comments, or opinions of others. When you master the ability to stay grounded during an amygdala hijack, the nature of the interaction shifts entirely. The fear you project is not the threat of physical harm or loud hostility, but the intimidating reality that you are a person of unshakable internal control. Someone who cannot be flustered, baiting, or rattled is inherently unpredictable and dangerous to cross because their responses are guided by clear, cold, rational thought rather than impulsive emotion. People naturally begin to hesitate before testing your boundaries, knowing that cheap shots and subtle disrespect will fail to destabilize you and will only highlight their own lack of composure. Control over yourself is the ultimate foundation for control over the room. In human social dynamics, behavior is regulated by an unwritten implicit cost-benefit analysis. Every single day, whether consciously or subconsciously, the people around you are evaluating where your boundaries sit and how far they can push before encountering friction. When someone makes a backhanded compliment, interrupts you in a high-stakes meeting, or uses subtle sarcasm to undermine your authority, they are conducting a social test. The fundamental principle governing this behavior is simple. People disrespect boundaries only when the social, emotional, or relational cost of doing so remains at absolute zero. When you allow bad behavior to pass without an effective, structured response, you are actively conditioning the people in your environment to treat your limits as flexible and optional. In behavioral psychology, an unpunished boundary violation acts as a form of passive reinforcement. It signals to the aggressor that taking a shot at your standing carries no risk, no discomfort, and no consequence to their own social capital. Over time, this dynamic normalizes disrespect, turning what might have been an isolated minor probe into a systematic pattern of behavior. Most people mistakenly believe that raising the cost of disrespect requires throwing a tantrum, raising your voice, or launching an aggressive personal attack of their own. However, high-intensity emotional reactions actually diminish your social value rather than increasing it. Loud aggression signals desperation and a loss of self-control, effectively lowering the cost for the aggressor by showing everyone in the room that you are easily unhinged. To effectively establish a high social cost, the friction you introduce must be surgical, calm, and unmistakably intentional. Raising the social cost begins with shifting the burden of discomfort entirely back onto the transgressor. When someone crosses a line, your goal is to immediately disrupt their social momentum and make them explain or confront their own behavior in real time. Through the deliberate use of calibrated inquiry and calculated stillness, you force their conscious mind to justify what was meant to be a cheap, low-effort attempt at dominance. By asking a direct, neutral question like, What exactly did you mean by that remark? Or simply maintaining steady eye contact and asking, are you trying to be helpful right now? You instantly transform their passive-aggressive comment into a public, uncomfortable micro-examination of their own conduct. The social cost matrix operates on the cold reality of reciprocity and access. Respect is maintained when others realize that disrespecting you carries an automatic, predictable price tag, whether that price is public awkwardness, the immediate withdrawal of your warmth and cooperation, or the loss of access to your time, energy, and expertise. When a person realizes that crossing your boundary consistently results in a negative emotional or social return for them, their brain registers a clear risk assessment. They recognize that targeted disrespect no longer yields cheap social laughs or a quick boost to their ego, but instead produces uncomfortable tension that they themselves must navigate. By methodically increasing the friction associated with bad behavior, you establish an invisible psychological guardrail around your personal dignity, ensuring that others calculate the steep cost long before they ever attempt to test your limits. In the immediate aftermath of a verbal challenge, a subtle put-down, or an intentional boundary violation, the default human response is to fill the air with noise. Most people react instantly by offering rapid explanations, nervous laughs, or rushed defenses to relieve the sudden spike of interpersonal tension. However, in high-stakes social dynamics, immediate verbal over-explanation is a critical indicator of low status and internal anxiety. It signals to everyone present that your emotional equilibrium has been disturbed and that you feel an urgent need to reestablish your position. True psychological leverage is held not by the person who speaks first or loudest, but by the person who can comfortably hold space in absolute silence. Calibrated silence is a deliberate, highly regulated conversational tactic designed to exploit the natural human intolerance for unscripted social friction. When someone attempts to undermine you, withholding an immediate verbal reaction creates a sudden, unexpected vacuum in the dialogue. During those initial seconds, you maintain unbroken, completely steady eye contact with a calm, unreadable facial expression. You refrain from micro-expressions of annoyance, defensiveness, or surprise. This combination of physical stillness and prolonged silence triggers an immediate shift in the neurobiology of the aggressor, instantly activating their own internal anxiety. The human brain is wired to look for behavioral feedback during social interactions to gauge whether an attack or dominance attempt was successful. When an aggressor receives complete silence instead of the expected defensiveness or submission, their internal prediction model breaks down. The absence of a quick emotional response forces them to reevaluate the entire dynamic. Within seconds, the psychological burden of the interaction flips completely. The discomfort and tension originally intended for you are reflected straight back onto the person who initiated the disrespect, causing them to question their own standing and scramble to fill the quiet void they just created. As the silence stretches past 2 or 3 seconds, the transgressor's prefrontal cortex kicks in to process the rising social risk. They begin to wonder if they went too far, if they miscalculated your reaction, or if they are about to face a severe, calculated consequence. In many instances, this mounting internal pressure forces the aggressor to self-correct in real time. They may try to laugh off their own comment, offer a hasty qualification, or backtrack entirely just to break the suffocating quietness you have imposed on the room. By simply refusing to participate in their conversational pace, you force them to bear the full weight of their own inappropriate behavior in front of whoever is watching. Mastering calibrated silence requires cultivating an exceptionally high tolerance for interpersonal awkwardness. It demands that you suppress the primal urge to immediately clear the air or restore harmony at the expense of your own dignity. When you combine unwavering eye contact with deliberate quiet, you project a quiet, formidably cold authority that cannot be easily swayed or manipulated. You communicate without saying a single word that you operate from an unshakable position of self-assurance, where cheap shots and casual disrespect do not even warrant the energy of a spoken reply. It is this profound composure in the face of provocation that ultimately conditions others to treat your boundaries with absolute reverence. Respect from the external world is never born in a vacuum. It is the direct outward reflection of your internal standard of self-awareness. Long before anyone in your environment makes the deliberate choice to honor your limits or test your patience, they are reading a complex tapestry of subtle, nonverbal cues that reveal how you treat yourself. If your internal state is chaotic, fragmented, or rooted in a desperate need for external approval, your boundaries will inevitably reflect that weakness. You cannot convincingly demand that other people treat your boundaries with gravity and care if you have not first clearly mapped, defined, and honored those standards within your own psyche. At its core, non-negotiable self-awareness requires an acute, highly honest inventory of your own emotional triggers, core values, and personal thresholds. It means knowing precisely where your line is drawn long before someone steps across it. Most people flounder in moments of disrespect simply because they operate in a state of passive emotional vagueness. They possess a general desire to be respected, but they have never taken the time to define what disrespect actually looks like in practice, nor have they decided in advance what their non-negotiable standards are. When a boundary violation occurs, their response is delayed, confused, or overly emotional because they are attempting to negotiate their limits in real time under heavy psychological stress. When you cultivate deep, unshakable self-awareness, you eliminate this internal ambiguity completely. You understand your own psychological terrain so thoroughly that an attack on your character, a subtle dismissal, or an attempt to undermine your standing is recognized instantly for what it is, an external event that has nothing to do with your true self-worth. This clarity allows you to decouple your self-image from the opinions and behaviors of those around you. You no longer view another person's bad behavior as a crisis that requires you to prove your value or engage in emotional warfare. Instead, you view it simply as objective data regarding their character and a clear signal that an established boundary must be enforced. Furthermore, authentic self-awareness protects you from the subtle trap of hypocrisy. If you demand that others respect your time, your emotional space, and your intellect, but you routinely compromise your own standards by flaking on your own commitments, tolerating abusive dynamics, or speaking down to yourself, you create a glaring contradiction in your social presence. Human beings are remarkably adept at sensing internal incongruity. When people observe that your internal standards are porous and inconsistent, they subconsciously adjust their behavior to match your lowest standard. They recognize that your demands for respect are merely performative, unsupported by genuine self-reverence. To project an aura of quiet authority that makes people hesitate before crossing you, your internal alignment must be absolute. This means treating your own promises to yourself with sacred discipline and holding your time, energy, and mental peace in the highest regard. When you establish an uncompromising standard of self-respect in your personal life, that boundary becomes a visible, tangible part of your physical presence. It dictates how you walk into a room, how you hold eye contact, how slowly you speak, and how effortlessly you reject bad behavior. People do not respect you because you demand it through force or persuasion. They respect you because your undeniable self-awareness makes it obvious that anything less will not be tolerated. The fundamental foundation of any powerful behavioral system relies on a single psychological truth. Human beings do not learn from occasional outbursts. They learn from predictable, repeated patterns. In behavioral psychology, conditioning relies entirely on the absolute reliability of outcomes. If a rule is enforced only half the time, or if a boundary produces a fierce consequence on Monday but is completely ignored on Thursday, the brain interprets that boundary as an unpredictable gamble rather than a firm barrier. When it comes to personal authority and social standing, erratic enforcement of your personal limits invites continuous testing, while cold, unshakable consistency permanently alters how others calculate the risk of crossing you. Most people fail at boundary enforcement because they rely on emotional intensity rather than behavioral predictability. They allow minor infractions, subtle disrespect, and small boundary violations to slide for days or weeks, swallowing their frustration in the name of keeping the peace. Eventually, the cumulative weight of those unaddressed slights causes them to snap, producing a dramatic emotional explosion over a relatively minor incident. This cycle of passive tolerance followed by explosive overreaction creates massive relational instability. Instead of teaching people to respect your limits, it teaches them that you are emotionally volatile, reactive, and driven by mood swings rather than clear, stable principles. To condition your social environment effectively, your enforcement mechanism must be as reliable and dispassionate as a physical law of nature. If someone puts their hand on a hot stove, the stove does not scream, throw a tantrum, or wait until it is in a bad mood to inflict a burn. It simply delivers an immediate, predictable physical consequence every single time. High status, emotionally intelligent individuals operate in the exact same manner. When a boundary is violated, they do not need to raise their voice, display anger, or enter into an argument. They simply execute the appropriate consequence with calm, surgical certainty, regardless of who is watching or how uncomfortable the moment might feel. This absolute predictability creates a profound shift in the psychological risk assessment of those around you. When people observe that crossing your established lines leads to a guaranteed, non-negotiable outcome, whether that means an immediate halt to the conversation, the cold withdrawal of your presence and cooperation, or a direct public call-out, their subconscious mind registers a clear boundary. They realize that testing your limits is no longer a low-risk game with a variable outcome, but a guaranteed path toward an uncomfortable social friction that they themselves will have to endure. This realization transforms their perception of you from someone who merely demands respect into someone whose boundaries are an undeniable reality of interacting with them. Maintaining this level of consistency demands incredible discipline, particularly in moments when enforcing a boundary feels inconvenient, awkward, or socially taxing. It requires you to prioritize your long-term self-respect over short-term comfort. Every time you enforce a boundary calmly and consistently, you reinforce your personal authority and build an internal track record of self-trust. Over time, this systematic approach creates a protective psychological aura around your presence. People in your personal and professional life begin to intuitively adjust their behavior, speaking to you with greater care, honoring your time, and refraining from cheap shots, simply because your unyielding consistency has taught them that disrespecting you is never worth the price.